So in the factory, all of the women and children were constantly exposed to white phosphorus. That's because on the ground floor of the factory, there were 300 machines dipping tips of wooden matchsticks into trays of this chemical. So there would be like chemical fumes coming from the machines, you know? And it was said that these fumes were very, very strong and like would fill the entire factory. So the women and children, they didn't get masks or gloves when working around these fumes. I mean, why would they? On top of that, the workers would be forced to take their food breaks inside of the factory. So they'd go from like working on these machines, touching the chemicals all day, to then like sitting down with chemicals on your hands, eating your food. And then when you weren't doing that, you were breathing in the fumes all day. And like you couldn't escape it if you worked in this factory. And you know, they didn't really have a choice, and they honestly didn't know exactly like how toxic it was. It actually took a while for the side effects to take over the body. But like after a little while, something not even strange, it was like real bad. It started to like happen to many of the workers. Something was going on. I guess workers were feeling super nauseous to the point of like vomiting everywhere. It was actually said that the workers would leave a trail of vomit on their way home every night. Like that's how sick they were. They would just like vomit all the way home. They also were experiencing intense diarrhea at the same time. So it was just coming out both ends. Not ideal. And you know, they're suffering. So vomiting, diarrhea, not great. And then not long after that, workers seemed to be getting these like horrible, super painful toothaches. Now, at first, they just kind of ignored it, thinking like it was just a coincidence. Like maybe from vomiting so much, they were getting a toothache. Maybe they just needed to brush more. I don't know, you know? Oral hygiene like wasn't a big priority in England at the time. So they just kind of, it'll work itself out. But then the toothache would spread to their jawline. Then abscesses would form inside of their mouths, and this would make the pain unbearable. So they'd be getting this pain, ouch. Then their teeth would start to loosen and then just like fall out. It was like a horror film. So over the next few months, one or both sides of their jaw would swell to the point where it was like almost impossible to chew food. Now listen, we're about to get graphic here, okay? So all these things are happening. Diarrhea, vomit, toothache, jaw, swelling, huh? Yes. Then these weird bumps would form on the bottom of their jaws, like down here, you know? So these bumps would like fill with pus. Listen, the bumps would eventually burst and the pus would leak out of their faces, leaving like gaping holes behind. So over the course of a few months, the flesh and bones around their jaws would just start to rot. Their jaws would start to crumble and slowly, piece by piece, just fall off their faces. Yes, their jaw would fall off their faces. Now it sounds fake, but it's not, okay? Most of the time, like the wounds were so severe that the workers would suffer from like horrible infections. And this was decades before antibiotics were a thing. So a lot of the time they just didn't survive past the point of their jaw falling off. Now, if you got lucky and you did survive, it didn't get any better because this mysterious disease would then spread to the brain. In best case scenario, they would be left with permanent brain damage, all for matches. So it started to become clear to the workers that this wasn't a coincidence. They were kind of putting two and two together, and they were believing that they were becoming ill because of this chemical that they were working with. I mean, they were inhaling this chemical all day, every day, and it entered, you know, in their body through their airways, again, eating, they're touching, it's just around them all the time. So the workers who weren't sick yet, they were either in denial that it would happen to them, or they were just completely terrified that, you know, they were going to be next. But what were they going to do? You know, quit? Let their families starve? I know it sounds silly because to you and I, we're like, yeah, quit. Find another job. But literally it was like, this was it for like, this was like their only option. So what were they going to do? As time goes on, more and more workers were getting sick, And I guess it would actually take around 2 to 5 years to develop symptoms after being exposed to phosphorus. So it was like it would slowly creep up on you. Now, sadly, there isn't a number out there, like an exact number of how many workers suffered with this disease, because nobody was recording how many cases were happening. The company, Bryant and May, they're like, no, we're not going to be reporting this. They don't want people to know. But as more and more people got sick, Bryant and May started to get a bit of a reputation. I mean, their workers were walking home barfing each night, and people were kind of taking notice. So Bryant said, quote, "We had one case, I think, of a child, and I think there was one of a young woman, although I forget whether we had two. But they had worked in small places before they came to us. The disease was not contracted in our factories at all." I mean, they were just straight up lying, you know? Meanwhile, workers were complaining about jaw pain so much that the company had to create a policy to deal with it. So the factory, they had offered the sick workers like less than $1 to stay home. This was supposed to be some kind of like olive branch to help support them while they recovered. But usually they never recovered. I mean, workers had years of toxic chemical exposure by the time the toothache started. And by that point, it was too late. So if you went on this like sick leave situation, after a few months, Bryant and May, they just stopped paying the women. You know, they're like, you're on your own, whatever. So many of the workers who got the dreaded toothache, they tried their best to hide it from the supervisors. The jaw pain continued, and as the bone in their jaws started to rot away, then like even weirder symptoms started. Now apparently there was a phosphorescent glow coming from within their body. The human body can do a lot of weird things, but I think we can all agree that glowing in the dark shouldn't be one of them, you know? Now, we actually did a dark history episode on the radium girls, do you remember? Where like something similar happened. Women were exposed to like a toxic chemical and it caused them to literally glow green in the dark. It was horrifying. So same thing. These people, these women, children, they're all glowing. This is when the disease became known as Phossy jaw. Honestly, when I heard Phossy jaw for the first time, it kind of sounded like it was the name of a dance. Like, do the Phossy jaw, do the Phossy jaw, like something like that, right? It sounded kind of cute. And then when I first like was researching for this episode, and then I looked up pictures and I was like, oh, that is not a dance. That is not a dance, Bailey. On top of everything, it was said that these women also like had a horrible smell to them. And I guess it like smelled kind of garlicky. So you have that garlicky smell, and then also you have the smell of like the flesh rotting from their faces. It was awful, awful, awful. And the only way to treat this like mysterious disease, at the time, they believed that giving the women mouthwashes would help and like treat the infection before it spread. But it never worked, you know, it didn't work. The only way to address it was to get surgery to remove the rotting jawbone. Now, this wasn't common because most people couldn't afford to see a doctor or get surgery. So getting Phossy jaw was pretty much just, you were getting a death sentence. Now, the workers at Bryant and May, they were not the only ones getting Phossy jaw. Because of the success of the Bryant and May Lucifer matches, eventually other factories, like over in America, started to use white phosphorus for their matches. And this led to several workers coming down with Phossy jaw as well. Now, one girl who had to deal with this was a 16-year-old girl named Cornelia. And she worked in a match factory in New York for like over 2 years. Then she started coming down with the symptoms of Phossy jaw. She got a toothache, and then her jaw started to swell, and they had extracted her tooth, but her jaw kept swelling. It got bigger and bigger, and then like a hole had formed in the flesh under her jaw. Now at that point, her jaw started to leak pus, and during all of that, she tried to power through it. I know, she kept showing up for shifts at the factory because she didn't want to lose her job. I know, like whenever I get cramps, I'm like, I'm out, I can't do it. And then it's like you hear stories like this and you're like, oh shit, I suck. It's wild what they put up with back then. But finally, for Cornelia, it got so bad that she had to be rushed to the hospital, and doctors, they had no choice but to remove her lower jaw. But listen, this was the 1800s, so they didn't have this cute little IV drip to help her like drift off to sleep with some morphine and then remove her jaw. No, she was awake the whole time. They bring out some kind of chainsaw-like device and they remove her jaw. Now, Cornelia, she would go on to survive this insane surgery. I don't know how she did it, because she didn't get any pain medicine, anything. That's raw dogging it, okay? Now, on top of that, she ended up having to have another surgery on the other side of her jaw because that side became infected. Both sides of her jaw are gone, okay? And apparently, afterwards, she was still able to talk and eat, so it was considered a success. Cornelia's story gets shared with the press because the doctors kind of want to like brag what they did because they're proud of it. So when it goes out to the press, they have these graphic illustrations of her surgery and Fossy jaw. And this is like when it started to put the disease on the map for the general public. So for the first time, people are like seeing what is going on. I mean, none of this is ideal, but Cornelia was a best case scenario. And her case might have given some people with Fossy jaw some hope. I mean, we don't know, but like maybe. If anything, it just kind of made people aware of the situation. Step 1, make people aware. Step 2, address the situation, you know? Still, at this point, there was a big question mark over the cause of the whole thing. Like, how could Bryant and May not see this coming? Now, it's been documented that Bryant and May were actually fully aware that white phosphorus gave workers Fossy jaw, and they just ignored. They looked the other way. They're like, what? That's crazy. We didn't know. What? That's nuts. That's so crazy. Whoa.